There we go. We're live. Hello. We have one person with us already. That's exciting. Well, hello. This is all being recorded, so I'll just start introducing and hopefully people will start arriving. So if you don't know me, I'm Vicki. I'm a documentary filmmaker and just general film lover, film enthusiast. And one of the things that's been so brilliant for me about getting onto Substack is finding all these brilliant film writers, of whom one of them is with me today, which is quite thrilling. And I love, I imagine lots of you are subscribed to Luke's publication, but if you're not, it's 2 films a week you do, don't you? One at the weekend and then an extra one for paid subscribers, I think. But they're really like a great sort of eclectic mix and lots of older films, which is very much my bag as well. So we had a chat a few weeks ago, but neither of us could stop talking. So we thought we could come on and share our mutual enthusiasm.
You are.
Yeah. And so we chose this early Peter Greenaway film, which you had seen, right? You saw in the cinema. I had not seen.
Yeah.
I thought I would. I know I shared the trailer before. Hopefully, many people watching this may have seen it or may not have seen it. We're going to try not to do actual spoilers for the overall plot, but we will be talking in quite a lot of detail. So, apologies if we do accidentally spoil or anything. But I'm going to read. I've got my trusty my 1998 Halliwell's film guide. It's still quite analog. And I'm going to read out what Mr. Halliwell had to say about the draftsman's contract. So he said, in 1964, a young draftsman receives a curious commission from a country gentlewoman. His rewards to include bed and board, BAWD. And then Halliwell's little comment, he says, pleasantly unusual, stylized puzzle film, which involves both sex and murder while maintaining a detached attitude to both. The period costumes help to give it an air of fantasy, which was presumably intended. We could talk about that. Then there's a few little very short review clips. So from Pauline Kael, legendary New York film critic, she says, mannered and idiosyncratic, the speeches are so arch and twitty that they seem to be pitched higher than a dog whistle. The Guardian said, perhaps the 4-hour version, which may one day become available, is clearer, if not more concise. And the Observer said, best enjoyed as a sly piece of double bluff, a puzzle without a solution, an avant-garde hoax in the spirit of Dada and the Surrealists. So I think that probably gives quite a good scene setter, doesn't it, for what this film is all about. Do you want to try and have a go at sort of setting a bit of the story without, as we say, without fully spoilering what happens in this film?
Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, the Draftsman's Contract is... it was made in 1981. It's set in a Wiltshire country house, Jacobean house. And I can't remember what the name of the house is. Compton Wynyates or something like that. But it's definitely Wiltshire or Hampshire.
Yeah, I think it's Wiltshire. Yeah,
and it's it's a sort of it's a small country house. It's a nice Jacobean country house. And set in 1694, and this is a very interesting time in English history. It's the end of the 17th century, and the family who live there are the Herberts. So you have a Mr. Herbert who is sort of landed gentry, and his wife, played by Janet Sisman, who is Mrs. Herbert. Who is they make it very clear, I don't know if you remember this in the film, that she is actually the granddaughter of a sort of self-made man. So they're very much on the make, they're aspirational family. And Mrs. Herbert then employs this rather sort of cocky draftsman, who is the draftsman, Mr. Neville, who is played by Anthony Higgins, who is brilliant. They form a contract for him to draw 12 drawings of the house from sort of different angles. And in return, he will be paid. But because this is something, again, watching it last night, which I hadn't really grasped, because he's so popular, he's a bit of a sort of Capability Brown figure, that he's in high demand from the aristocracy. So he doesn't really want to do it because they're sort of minor gentry. So the added bonus of him doing these drawings is basically the sexual favors of Mrs. Herbert. Is that the best way to put it? So they draw up this contract, and then he starts to draw the house from various angles, and manages to annoy the the people who live, the inhabitants, the family who live in the house, which includes Mrs. Herbert's daughter, who was played by Anne-Marie Lambert, who was wonderful Miranda in Hanging Rock, and then her ghastly husband, Mr. Talman, who's German, who has a full wig and everything. He's played by help me out,
Hugo.
And then Fraser, yeah, you recognise from Poirot, as Captain Hastings in Poirot. So he's great in it. And while he's drawing the house, I don't want to ruin the plot, but it's basically a whodunit. It's a murder mystery, and all these clues as to the final murder are recorded in his drawings.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? Because I don't. Well, obviously the billing. I think the billing at the time did say it was a murder mystery, but watching it, I made I rewatched it as well, ready for this, and I think it's more than halfway through the film when there's finally a corpse. But before that, it's almost like you're told that there's going to be you're almost kind of told there's going to be a murder, and you're told it's like you see the clues before you know that there's a body. It's which like a lot of these films, it's things you see on the screen and retrospect.
There is a body
murder mystery, isn't it?
Towards the end of the film, so. It's a film which can be seen on two levels. You can watch it as I think Peter Greenaway said it himself, you can watch it as a sort of murder mystery. It's a slightly, it's a bit of a
confusing murder mystery, isn't it? As those
you have to probably watch it a few times before you work out exactly what's going on. And it's taken me, I've watched it so many times. I think finally I sort of understand it now.
Do you remember when you first saw it? Did you come out?
Yeah, so my aunt,
what you'd seen or not?
My Hampstead aunt took me to see it at Belsize Art House Cinema in 1982, which was at the time of the Falklands War, and that's when I don't know how old I was, but I was still at school. Yeah, I was at school, and I didn't understand it then. In a minute, I remember thinking it was very beautiful to watch, and it's very visual, and Peter Greenaway is a very visual director. So it's an amazingly pretty film. It's a really beautiful film to look at.
It's painterly, isn't it? It's
absolutely very beautiful, and it's composed, as he says. He composes it like in sort of art historical terms. It's all beautifully proportioned, and it was actually shot on 16mm as well, which always amazes me. Which was Super 16.
And then it's blown up, right, for the theatre
format, because for people watching. Cinema, most major films were shot in 35mm, and 16mm was almost like a sort of amateur format or sort of format you might in documentaries. So it was shot on something called Super 16 and then blown up to 35mm, and it does look amazing for that. Really, it's a little bit blurry because you lose the definition of 16mm, but it does look fantastic. So it's a really beautiful visual film.
I think it's been restored as well, hasn't it? I think the BFI version is what I watched.
Remastered.
It's I think it might be a 4K restoration, but it's absolutely visually, it's completely stunning.
Yeah. So I think it can be seen on two levels. We can go into this later. So you can just watch it as a period drama, a very beautiful period drama, with a bit of a sort of Dorothy L. Sayers murder mystery thrown in, at the end to some extent. And I think that may explain also why it was a huge success at the time. Because Peter Greenaway, I think it was the first film in cinema he had made, wasn't it?
It was definitely it was his break. I don't think it wasn't his first film. But it definitely
financed by Channel 4, and we were doing wonderful things in the early 80s. And it was a great, in my opinion, I love the films of the early 80s. I think they're absolutely brilliant. And there was a sort of great feeling that the British was a company called Goldcrest that was doing very well, and there was a sort of great feeling that the British were beginning to.
There was a lot of confidence, wasn't there, in the British film industry?
Yeah, they were suddenly making really amazing sort of sort of slightly spiky, edgy films, which actually people wanted to go see at the cinema. And then Channel 4, which was a new channel, which was doing fantastically wonderful, sort of slightly subversive stuff at the time. Like there's a program called After Dark, when Oliver Reed got completely pissed out of his brain onto live television. But they're doing all sorts of interesting things, and they financed.
This must have been one of their first films, because that's when they started in '82, Channel 4. So this must have been one of the first films.
Yeah, I think it was, and it was huge. And the thing I understand is that the Draughtsman contract, Peter Greenaway was an avant-garde film director, but for various reasons, this film just hit the zeitgeist, the mainstream, and it became a film that everybody wanted to go and see. Everybody was talking about. I remember an article about it, I think in Tatler or Harper's and Green or something like that, and it was huge, and it was it was made at a time when people actually went to the cinema to watch the latest film. And so it was a massive thing at the time. And then I remember World of Interiors. They kept the house.
They were desperate to find which house it was, weren't they? They were desperate.
Yeah, so it was actually shot in this house called Groombridge Place in Kent, even though the house is supposed to be in Wiltshire, which is a beautiful Jacobean house. And the owner didn't want it. He was discreet. He didn't want people to know where it was, so they kept it secret. And then I think World of Interiors, which again was a magazine that had just been launched in 1981. And that was another hugely, I can't stress how, influential that magazine was at the time. It really was. And they then tracked down the house and did a whole thing about it. So it was very much part of that sort of early 80s sort of mindset, which was, happening at the time.
And when did Brideshead Revisited come out? Because that
Brideshead was 1981, so good old Granada.
It's a different film, isn't it? The country house. You could see.
Yeah, well, Brideshead. I mean, I love Granada.
Think, it's another Granada.
Yeah, no, so I love Granada, and they made they made Sherlock Holmes, and they made all sorts of wonderful, with Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes. They made wonderful television programs, and Brideshead was again massive in '81. I mean, the Daily Mail would do huge double spreads on it. It's very hard for people now to understand quite how these films had huge impact.
Well, there was just so much less. We're awash now, aren't we? We're drowning in content, and
that's right. And I remember
and the cinema, and if you didn't see it in the cinema, you had to wait. What? Well, actually, early '80s. Was there VHS releases?
People. I mean,
wait till it comes on TV some years later.
That's right. I mean, my parents didn't get a video recorder until probably the mid '80s.
Yeah.
85. So
you're probably talking 2-3 years maybe until it. Well, maybe not in this case because Channel 4 part funded it. But if you don't see it when it's in the cinema, it's a wait. Quite a considerable wait till you get another chance to see it. So
and then I mean,
much stronger than it is.
We could check the TV times and stuff, but ITV, Channel 4, wouldn't it? So Channel 4 would have then shown it. I don't know when it first showed. I should have looked that up. But you're absolutely right. If you couldn't see it, you had to wait and until it came out again. And then I think by the mid '80s, people are getting video recorders, and so then everybody would go off and buy the video of Draughtsman's contract. I think I've probably got one upstairs actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, anyway, it was a massive thing, and that's what I really want to stress to people, how influential it was as a film. And, again, I think I go back to Brideshead. I mean, I remember being at my grandparents' house, and there was a copy of Vogue magazine, and opening it up, and there was this huge double spread all about Brideshead, and that was a year before it came out. So and it was just so influential. I think Draughtsman's contract, like Brideshead, there were two films that really made an impact in some different ways, and both, of course, set in country houses, which again I think is. And
is it right to say? I think we talked about this a little bit before. It might have been sort of somewhat earlier than when the Draughtsman contract came out, but there was. I was a teenager in the 90s, so I mean, I was a tiny child when this film came out. So I hadn't seen it at all, in fact, until we watched it for this. I'd seen other Greenaways that came out later at the time. But my impression of, I suppose, maybe the 70s, the sort of country house, a lot of big country houses were having to be sold off and, maybe be given to the National Trust, or wasn't there like a big art exhibition or something that like the English country house was
Roy Strong
theories about it. Yeah. It was like,
yeah.
I mean, we still access the country houses, but particularly maybe in that sort of 70s, 80s.
Well, I think more then than now.
Yeah.
And Roy Strong did a very influential exhibition at V&A.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
60s, I think in the late 60s, apologies if I got that wrong, but late 60s or early 70s, called, the Death
so
of the
it's a while
Country House.
before.
It's Death of the Country House or Destruction of the Country House, whatever it was.
That's the one I'm thinking of, yeah.
Because families after the Second World War were literally blowing up their houses.
Death duties and things, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in the 80s, so when the Draughtsman's contract comes out, there's this great, there's this sort of massive interest again in and I think of Merchant Ivory,
Yes,
Room of the View and all the films. The English country house became a very fashionable subject. More
like this film, the time period when it was set is not necessarily one that I don't know, that I would immediately. It's not Edwardian or Victorian or Elizabethan. It's a time of exactly. I'm sort of teeing you up really because I know you have lots. You know a lot about this period, but it's a very 1694 is not.
It is one of my favourite.
He's not pulled that year out of.
It is
period. Glorious Revolution and all of that.
The late 17th century is one of my favourite periods. It is really, really interesting time. So the first thing, you're absolutely right. I mean, most country house films in the 1960s and 70s, and I write about this a lot, tend to be in that period just before the First World War. And again, in the 70s, they're obsessed with the Edwardian period, the years leading up to 1914. So that's a normal setting. So it's very unusual to have a country house film set at the time of the Glorious Revolution. I can't think of any others. I mean, can you? I mean, they may.
No, and I'm not even sure as a period of history outside of cinema. I don't even know how well that period. People know the Glorious Revolution, William of Orange.
I've just written an amusing post on. There's a very amusing 1970s folk horror film called The Blood on Satan's Claw, and that is actually set in the 1690s. So there you go. But apart from that, I can't think of any. So it's a really interesting time. So remember that England is still England. So the United Kingdom hasn't happened yet. So although the monarch is the king of or queen of England and Scotland and Ireland, there's no unification.
They're separate countries.
That's right. They're effectively separate countries, but with the same monarchs.
Yeah.
So England has I should perhaps even say Britain now, because Scotland is involved. But England or Britain has just got over the Civil War, and was an appalling, time in many ways of sort of anarchy, and so there's been a restoration in 1660, and then suddenly there's a sort of burgeoning middle class who, because there's sort of everything's got settled, and there's sort of less war, and people begin to start putting money. There's also the birth of capitalism in a sense. So the Bank of England gets founded, and there are coffee houses in St James's where all these people go, like the members of the Royal Society, and the Enlightenment and all this stuff. So there's this huge progress in science and exploration. There's peace. There's capitalism being founded. And so there is this rising middle class. I don't want to stress too much how big it is, because it's still really relatively small. But they then start demanding tea and sugar. And that's when the colonies come in. So in the West Indies are producing sugar, and they're getting tea from China, which isn't really a complicated sort of colony. But they're importing tea from China or from the stations in China, like places like Canton. And then they're also getting sugar from the West Indies. So it's a time when the British Empire, what becomes the British Empire, is really beginning to take off. And it's basically when England then is rising, a rising power in the world. And then you have, so they kick out. So what happens is that James II, who's
I was about to say the religion, Catholic, Protestant,
he becomes a Catholic. Because his mother, who was Catholic, And so basically, Parliament says, we're not having this. They kick him out, and then replace him with William of Orange, who was a Protestant Dutch, married to Mary, who is the daughter of the Stuarts. So it's again the beginnings, really, of constitutional monarchy, in the sense that Parliament has decided that they're going to install or remove a king.
And Protestantism, it's kind of the moment that Protestantism wins, basically, in this country, isn't it? That there's been a little bit difficult moving from
Yeah, so you Henry VIII of the Reformation,
and then Mary comes back, and
you know, and you could argue that Henry VIII really wasn't a Protestant at all. He just did it purely he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. But yes, that's right. So by this period, and again, we've had extreme Puritanism, of course, with the English Civil War, because Cromwell, they were something called Puritans, who were this sort of very almost like a sect, or they were a sect. So we sort of compromised, but by this period, we were Protestant, even though we were building cathedrals like St. Paul's in a Baroque style. So it's a good
little throwaway moment in the film, isn't there? When there's a young child in it who, at some point through the film, saying that he's the nephew of the German husband that you mentioned.
Mr. Talman,
and she says that he's an orphan. His father has died, and then his mother becomes a Catholic. And so they bring him here, and she says that him being an orphan, and she's like, but what about he's not an orphan just because his mother was a Catholic, but effectively by then he is an orphan because his mother is a Catholic, because we are now England, Britain.
So did you it then becomes Great Britain when they unification under Queen Anne. Did you pick up on the fact that Mr. Neville is a Scottish Catholic? Did you pick that up?
Oh no, okay, so that would explain why when he makes that comment then, right.
So Peter Greenaway is sort of obsessed with duality, in the sense that he loves, like in 17 Noughts and everything, but he loves sort of twins and opposing ideas, like the yin and the yang, that sort of idea. So you have the family, the Herberts, are, although they're gentry, which would suggest that they're probably Tories rather than Whigs, they are very much establishment people who are on the side of the Protestant William of Orange. They're not Jacobites. They're not. So they are very much part of that new establishment that has been created. Mr. Neville, the Draughtsman, he wears completely different clothes. They're all wearing white and he's in black.
Yeah, it's great, that, isn't it? And then later on, when they're all in, I don't know. They're in black for mourning. He comes back and he's wearing white.
And
he's out of step with them, isn't he? Yeah.
Mr. Neville, he is a Scottish Catholic, and it's also
I think I got the Scottish bit, but yeah,
he's probably a Jacobite. You see.
Yeah, right.
So he King over the water and all that.
Yeah, right. That makes sense.
Which comes later on. So you've got all that going on, which I think is really, really interesting. And so what else can we? What else can we now? Do you want to talk perhaps about the 1980s and how I think that mirrors this?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because it's not insignificant, isn't it? I think if Greenaway or someone was making a film in the 1690s now, different resonances probably would come out as we'll call that the early 80s. We're in a different world now, aren't we?
Shall we quickly talk about the Women's Property Act and the whole question?
Yeah, and what we've discovered about that. Greenaway was quite a kind of japester, wasn't he? I mean, the film is full of jokes, visual jokes and puns and things, but also even in the sort of the behind the scenes seems to be full of conceits.
I mean, the best way to approach the Draughtsman's contract is to realise that the entire film, in a way, is an elaborate tease. It's a puzzle, it's a conundrum, and there are all sorts of deliberate red herrings. So in my DVD version, there's a very interesting interview with Peter Greenaway talking about the film, and in that he says quite specifically that because a lot of the film is all about property and the rights of women to have property, and without ruining the plot too much, is one of the themes of the film, how the women want to gain control of the house. And of course, in those days, up until 1870, I really hate to tell people this, but if you were married, a woman was married to a man, then
you were the property. You were part of the man's estate. Yeah,
you were exactly right. So in the film, Mrs. Herbert has inherited the house because her father's obviously made a lot of money. He's come from nowhere, joined the landed gentry, bought or built this house, and then she's inherited it. But then she's married this Mr. Herbert, and so legally, it's Mr. Herbert's house, and that carried on until 1870. So that's when the act changed, when women could start inheriting property in their own right. So Peter Greenaway in his interview says, I based the film, there was this really important, 1694 was a really important time because it was when the Bank of England and when capitalism was taking off. Yeah, that's absolutely right. But it was also really important because there was this Act of 1694 which allowed women to have property to some extent. So, there's some thought, really? I thought it was 1870. Okay, but, Anyway, when we go and investigate, we find this is absolutely not true in any shape or form. However, there was some sort of women's...
Whatever the name of the Act, it is the exact name of the Act. It's something like Married Property Act or something.
Well, no, it was to do with your housekeeping. So until 19... And again, sorry, anybody, women watching this, but it's true that up until 1964, all the housekeeping money belonged to the husband.
Yeah.
So if you didn't work, if you weren't a working woman, you were a housewife, which a lot of women were at that time. All the money that
your income is your husband's,
was your husband's, in a sense. Any money that you put into like buying a Hoover or whatever technically belonged to your husband. So they changed that in 1964, and there is an idea that, Peter Greenaway, I can't believe, obviously a highly intelligent man, that he made an entire film.
I don't think he does things by accident, does he? 1694, 1964. That
no. So he's teasing.
He's playing.
I'm sure he is. I cannot believe that he made an entire film based on something that just totally doesn't exist. So it's a tease, and that once you understand that, you then begin to understand in the film. So there were other things which never actually made it to the final cut. So in the film, he has the characters in full wigs on mobile, great big 1980s sort of yucky mobile phones. He has a Roy Lichtenstein's type painting, which apparently you can still see. I've never seen it on the wall. So what he's doing, it's like a postmodern take. It's almost like he's anti-period drama. So he's got no time for films where everything is completely accurate.
It's so theatrical, isn't it? And this morning I was watching. He made, as you said, he was kind of an avant-garde, almost like an art filmmaker. Really, before this was his commercial sort of breakout, and actually possibly his most commercial film. Really, after that, his films became, he almost like reverted to type, really. But one of the films that I'd read that he mentioned as more of, I guess, a visual reference was this called Vertical Measures Remade. But that involves this character who, when I saw about it, I rang a bell from something I'd read with the Draughtsman contract. Is this sort of fictional character who Greenaway has often said is a kind of alter ego for him, called Tulse Looper, which apparently Tulse sounds a bit like pulse, and Looper is gesturing at lupine and wolves and things. But it's I guess you'd call it like this Vertical Measures film. It's like a sort of mockumentary found footage thing, and there's this Tulse Looper character. They've discovered loads of his drawings and things, and they're trying to reconstruct a film that he perhaps made. But I was like, Tulse Looper, that rings a bell. And when I was reading, I think it might have been the DVD restoration that they did a 20th anniversary, I think, so 2002 it would have been, and there was something sort of liner notes from that. And Greenock, so the opening little sequence before you sort of properly get into like the pre-title sequence, basically, is still quite long. I think it might be 8 or 9 minutes long, but originally, because the whole cut was 4 hours, it was really, really long, and it had a whole developed bit with Tulse Looper in it, which he had to cut down for time. But his whole thing is just not even within the film, it's full of kind of in jokes and visual references and things. But it seems like even in his whole body of work. And you mentioned the what's it called? Dead and Two Noughts, not zero. Yeah. There's like throwing forward into that film. His whole oeuvre is filled with kind of self-referential and kind of jokes, and like you said, like he's teasing. Although I think it's all quite deadly serious in another way. He's taking it, but it's so playful.
Have you ever been to the Dennis Severs house in Spitalfields?
No.
You know?
Oh, hang on. Is that the one that's still as it was in the 18th century? Is that the one?
Yeah.
I think I have. Yeah.
No, it's fantastic. It's like a living theatre. So
I have been there, yeah.
A very long story short, it's an 18th century Huguenot house in Spitalfields, which has been, they have different periods on different floors. So the basement's Victorian. The top bit is exactly the period we're now talking about, the 1690s. And there's sort of sounds of horses and, oyster sellers outside of that. The whole thing is theatre. And in that, it's got a wonderful sense of period atmosphere. But within all his arrangements on the tables, there might be some sort of little plastic thing from a Christmas cracker from the.
Oh, really? How funny! Yeah,
and it reminds me very much of the Draughtsman's Contract in that sense. That it's very much a film that creates the atmosphere of the late 17th century.
Yeah, and the costumes apparently they're not historic.
Yeah, they're way over the top.
Much
so
more
flamboyant. So we never had wigs like that. The whole thing is sort of over the top, sort of theatrical recreation. And I'm a great believer in this in films. That famously Elizabeth R. with Glenda Jackson. I think there's a radiator in that.
Really?
Old Mott Sheila radiator. Yeah. But it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, it's all about creating an atmosphere. And I think
and actually, the whole Draughtsman Contract, very consciously, he's drawing attention to the artifice and the theatricality. I mean, literally, the Draughtsman has this drawing frame. And structurally, the film is, as you said, is sort of.
And the drawings,
12 drawings. So you're just repeating all the way. He's just doing a drawing here at this angle of the house, and then he's doing a drawing here at this angle of the house, and all the time it's doing through this sort of grid that he's drawing. And of course, so there's this sort of playful thing. It's literally framing the picture, but then there's this sort of joke that the whole thing is about a frame up in terms of the plot side of things. And then of course there's the camera frame. Like very often the camera is literally in situ of this frame. And when I was watching it the second time, I was really sort of looking at this bit more, trying to look at it more closely because I was less bamboozled by trying to follow like what was actually going on. But he does have close-ups, but for a lot of it is very theatrical and stagey, and it's just these sort of like tableaus front on, and apparently he deliberately cast very, very experienced stage actors as well, and he wanted to, as much as he could, do like really long takes and just have them sort of acting in long stretches like you would on the stage. And that it sort of feels like and the music from every angle, he's drawing your attention to the artifice and maybe it's a good time to talk about the music as well. Nyman's score, like that's sort of like fake Purcell, isn't it? It's kind of
before we talk about the music, which I think is a really important part of the film. Can I ask you what do you make of the statue, the living statue, and maybe explain anybody who hasn't seen it?
Initially, I was completely baffled. From the reading, it sounds like in his 4-hour version, it was more explained. I mean, I think in the end, I went with it as more of it was just a gag, right? It didn't seem to, I didn't get any, as it goes on, it's clear, because initially I was like, is this a complete, is this a sort of, within the film, is this like, that the people watching the film can see this, but the people in the, is this actually a statue that we're kind of seeing moving? But then it became clear through events in the film that the characters that they're well aware that there's this living statue, and presumably he's just a servant, right? He's just somebody who's paid to look nice and kind of amuse them, but they get fed up of it at times and they sort of throw fruit.
So I mean again, you may need to take this with a pinch of salt. I read or I saw Peter Greenaway talking about it. I think maybe I read somewhere. Peter Greenaway said that basically in the 18th century or the late 17th century they employed.
So that was a real thing, right? Having people.
Well, I don't know now.
We don't know if anything he says is real.
That's what he said, but he said they employed servants apparently to stand around looking. I mean, certainly in the 18th century, with English landscape tradition, they employed people to act as hermits. So you'd have a sort of picturesque hermit a mile away, and that is true. But
also, just to follow that thread, you were saying they're sort of slightly they're new money, really, aren't they? They're kind of only
they are.
Presumably, it's quite expensive to cast a load of permanent statues around your property. But if you want to,
I think they're rolling. They've got lots of money. I don't think they've got any problem with.
Oh, okay. So they're not. They would be wealthy enough to. I was just thinking, like, is it cheaper to just pay a person?
No, I think it's part of the whole classical. Because the other thing is they going into this period. This is going. The first Inigo Jones church is built in Covent Garden. It's still there, and in a sort of Tuscan neoclassical style, or sort of Tuscan style, and so they're moving towards classicism. And actually, at the end of the film,
the is coming.
Well, a little bit before. So the garden is actually Baroque. Really, it's influenced by the French Catholic, of course. sort of baroque tradition. And then at the end of the film, Mrs. Herbert employs a Dutchman to come in and remodel it along Dutch lines, which would be a little bit more, was a sort of in between the sort of Versailles style.
Yeah, she says something like introduced more ease or something, I think she says, doesn't it? And
because they were heading towards this. So in the 18th century, they like, if you go to places like Starhead and stuff, they had the sheep going right up to the front door. Capability Brown would make these huge lakes. And there was this in-between bit of the Dutch style, which of course was very fashionable because the King, William III, was Dutch. There was this great Dutch influence now, more austere, more classical coming in. And again, Protestant, that's something to really bear in mind.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And so, by the end of the film, they decide to remodel the garden, and the garden is a really important part of the film, isn't it? It's beautiful, the way that the obelisks and
arguably, really, he's drawing the garden, isn't he? I mean, he draws the views are, the house is in there, although actually it's not even in all of the views, but even in the views where it is, it's always in the background with the foreground of these incredible gardens.
Do you want to talk about the Mutant Nymans? I know you're very keen on Michael Nyman's music.
Well, where do I recognise this from? And this I don't know if I should confess this, but I'm going to. I was like, I really recognise this music, and then you said to me it was the Pet Shop Boys had reused it. So I looked that up, and I did remember that song, but I was like, I don't think that's where I'm recognising it from. And so I, Wikipedia or whatever, where this song had been used, and I'm pretty sure that the place that I was remembering hearing this music was this Walker's Crisps advert from about 20 years ago with the Beckham.
Yeah. Right.
And it was so, it was really funny having watched the Draughtsman contract. It's her, sort of arriving in a sort of carriage at a country, stately home, and she gets out and it's close-ups on her feet, walking up the gravel drive, and she goes and sits in her throne, because this was, I guess, not that long after their famous wedding with their thrones that the Beckhams had. And then she opens her bag of Walker's crisps and she's like, oh, Dave. And it's like it was a time when Walker's had come out with some, like fancy flavours. So it was like posh crisps. And then she turns over and it's not David, it's Gary Lineker. But it was just very, arch and knowing. And then having seen where that music had come from, it seemed...
Well, it shows you how influential Draughtsman's contract, was.
Yeah.
And it was because then, of course, the Pet Shop Boys, Lovers of Bourgeois Constructors, which is, and I think there's also a video, which I haven't seen, which I think has bits of Draughtsman's contract.
Oh, okay. It's based, is it?
King Arthur.
Melody is the Purcell, the original, is it?
Yes. So I did a bit of research into this. So if you go onto Spotify and listen to King Arthur, which is an opera by Purcell, an English composer of this period, there is the main theme, Chasing Sheep, or whatever it's called, is taken.
Chasing Sheep is just for shepherds. It's great, which is a line in the film. From German, Mr. Talman.
It's not like a direct lift. It's basically he's taken he's taken like a few bars and then reworked it into something quite edgy, something quite.
It's very minimalist-y sounding. It kind of made me think of Philip Glass and Steve Reich. And the experience watching the film where it's like, especially the first time around, he's just doing it's almost like it keeps repeating. The draftsman just moves somewhere else and he's drawing another slightly different drawing of the same thing, and the music is sort of like a slightly different repeat of the motif of the overall. It's not all the same music all the way through.
No, it's
very enfolding on itself, isn't it? And repeating
funny enough, my favourite bit of his music, which is not actually on Spotify, if you listen to the trailer, and actually also in bits of the film, there is a variation of the main theme, which I think is fantastic. And I sort of desperately trying to download it on Spotify, and you can't get it.
Oh,
they just,
where that is.
You can played it to the trailer, I think.
Was Nyman, it's like I saw that he had done the music on the one I mentioned before, the Vertical Measures remade with Brian Eno. But was Nyman, I remember I became aware of him, I think, from the piano, which was, 10 years ago. But was he known that time already, Nyman, or not? Did Greenaway bring him to attention?
Certainly became, really well known as a result of the film.
Yeah, as a result of this, presumably, yeah.
People would go out and buy it on, those days people would still buy records or, because DVDs, not DVDs, CDs come in when do CDs come in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, very late 80s, early 90s, I'd say, yeah.
Yeah. Are you still on cassette then? I think I probably went and bought it on cassette. I'm sure I did. But the music is brilliant, and I think it's like I have this sort of idea that there are certain films. I mean, Gone with the Wind is another one where if you remove the music, it's just Chariots of Fire. Another one.
Pastoral, traditional classical English music. It would have a different feel to the whole thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah. It's so important to the film. It's a brilliant. The whole thing is just absolutely brilliant.
The whole tone, really, it's quite, I don't know, I was trying to think like what the adjectives are. You sort of see, witty and arch, and that's right, but it's kind of, it doesn't feel like sarcastic, but it's just very heightened, isn't it, the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really getting into, so when I write my my Substack, Week in Flicks, and anybody who follows it will know that I'm really into, I love 1970s stuff, but I'm also really into 80s stuff up to the 85, and there is an amazing number of really incredibly interesting, slightly subversive, creative films made in that period up to about 85. And in my opinion, it sort of tails off a bit, and it may be to do perhaps a gold press, I don't know. But and the music with these films and a bit electronica, like so Vangelis with Chariots of Fire. In another country, there's some fantastic incidental music in that, and there are some incredibly interesting soundtracks.
Like it was a very interesting time because from what I'm sure you know miles more than I do, but especially a few decades even earlier than that, sort of in the middle part of the 20th century, British film was somewhat derided. I think it was not particularly taken all that seriously. Maybe pre-60s.
Well, I think it had
Hollywood was just so dominant, but then some money gets put into it, doesn't it? It's there are a lot are exciting films happening in the 60s and 70s, and that Channel 4 starts. But you got Greenaway was funded, as you said, by the British Film Institute. But maybe it's a sort of a moment in time when there was a bit of money, but almost like the stakes were lower because people didn't. I don't know, the industry was not big.
So the Hollywood.
Then when they did become successful, then the stakes are higher and people want more of the same and repeat it. No.
So I mean, you're a film director, so you know more about this than I do about funding. But in the 1960s, with Swinging London, the Hollywood studios were certainly putting money financing. Films like If, Lindsay Anderson. I think it's a wonderful film.
Well, Britain became very hot, didn't it, in the 60s?
Well, that all goes by, if you then start looking at 1970s filmographies, you've got...
But that wasn't to do with the film. That was to do with music, really, wasn't it? Music and fashion, and film perhaps was like riding on the coattail, I would say, riding on the coattail.
Like that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then by the 70s, you start... there's some amazing films made in the 70s, early 70s, but if you start looking at the filmographies of the time, there's a lot of, Confessions of a Window Cleaner stuff going on. And they did all this stuff, like they would take, Are You Being Served, which was a slightly naff sitcom, was made into this, and On the Buses then became a feature film. So there was an awful lot of, sorry everybody, dross being made at this time. And then suddenly in the early 80s, there's this revival, and The Elephant Man, which I think is a wonderful film, I think like one of the early 1980. The Long Good Friday, another fantastically good film. So there were this amazing creativity coming out of the early 1980s, and I think it does come. We discussed this earlier. I think the punks movement starts in 77, and I remember as a little boy liking cars and noticing how the cars in 1976 began to get much more angular and much more square.
Yeah.
Well, if you look at the earlier cars in the early 70s, they're more rounded, and that's really interesting. It's sort of, car design is a really important thing, actually. That you could tell that we were already heading toward the 1980s. Actually begins in the late 70s, and I think the punks, I'm sure, would not agree with me, but I think Margaret Thatcher and the punks in many ways are doing similar things, but from totally different
it's a disruption, isn't it? It's a disruption with the sort of post-war.
Yeah, they're coming in and they're radicals and they're disruptors.
But the other thing that you're talking about for me, like I said, I do sort of just about remember the early 80s, but I mean, I was 5 when this film came out. But what I do remember, I definitely remember the Mohicans, punks, Union Jack and things, but also New Romantics. And this film, I know that the wigs and the costumes, it was historically not accurate, but historically sort of broad kind of 17th century look. But the new romantics were also very like lots of ruffs and collars and makeup and for men and very sort of visually flamboyant. Like, whereas I was a teenager in the early 90s, there was none of that. It was all, check shirts and blokey bloke. That early 80s period seems to me, looking back on it without really remembering it, just much more experimental. And
it was also cool, they were also reacting, you see, against all the prog rock stuff. So in the 70s, the Reading University in the old Grey Whistle test, and it was full of people with sort of stained t-shirts and long hair, and there was a big reaction in the early 80s. So on top of the pops, you get these very sort of edgy groups.
Plus, where they wear black, baby boomers who were that's when they're coming of age, right? You're born in the late 40s, early 50s. By the early 80s, you're hitting your young adulthood.
But there was this reaction to 70s grunge, and so rock music and Brian Ferry, very early examples of that in the 70s, where they were sort of completely different from all the sort of prog rock people with long hair and t-shirts and beards and everything. So there was a big reaction against the hippies and grunge. It became fashionable, and people walking around with wing collars if you're trendy in the 80s.
I feel sad now that we don't really have, I don't know. It doesn't feel like, maybe it's just because I'm too old, but does anybody look, is there anything different in sort of...
No, I think we live in a very boring bland world. I'm very depressed by the world we live in. I think
well, it just feels like culture is sort of like stopped in a way, but maybe that's just because I'm old. I don't know. I'm just looking at the time. It's 1:15. Did we see, I don't know if anybody wants to ask Luke or me, probably Luke's got more knowledge, but anybody wants to throw a question or a comment or, I know for sure that you and I could carry on waxing lyrical for quite a lot longer, but I also know that it's lunchtime. People might want to go and,
so we're going to record
what they're doing, but this is recorded, And
we will then release it later on as a recording.
Yeah, and maybe we'll throw in a few links to some of those other things we've talked about, well, I'm really glad that we picked this film because and it's still, to be honest, it's made me want to the Greenaway that I most remember or was most familiar with was the cook, the thief, his wife and his lover. So now I want to go back. I'd quite like to rewatch that now, knowing, because I didn't know anything about Greenaway really. That was a film, I guess. When did that come out?
It made me want to go back and the early stuff that you took, because I haven't seen his early shorts.
No, well, I've only just watched that. They're all on the BFI. They're all on the BFI player for free. Well, I don't know.
And again,
15 of his shorts on there.
Yeah, and you were saying earlier that they reminded you of Robinson in Ruins.
Oh, so much. Yeah, that this Tulse Looper as a character. Really interesting. So maybe we might come back and talk about those films. I love those.
So I'm definitely going to start, looking. I've seen most of these the ones everybody's seen.
Yeah.
Belly of an Architect, because the other one I remember seeing.
Yeah. And I watched Prospero's Books when it came out as well, which I think is a bit, with Gielgud being kind of a bit...
Prospero's Books.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah.
Well,
pretty out there.
I'm ashamed to admit that I saw that with a friend of mine, a great friend of mine, and I hate to say it, it's terrible. We walked out of it, I think.
Oh, did you?
Through.
Wow.
Well, honestly, how old was I don't know. Much. I didn't really understand it.
Yeah, I don't really remember understanding it, but I think I watched it. It was around the time when I was sort of getting into film.
No, I wouldn't.
And we felt very grown up and sort of sophisticated watching this totally bonkers thing with Gielgud being crazy.
Yeah, so apologies to Peter Greenaway. I'm sure I would not walk out of it now, and I'm sure I would. But I was a lot younger then, and I was with a friend. But I think there was John Gielgud. I think we lost it when I think there was a close up sort of John Gielgud start naked in a underwater tank. And there were sort of zooms in on his derriere. Tank.
Your tolerance may vary for.
No, it's like oh my god, this is so weird, and what's happening, But I must rewatch it, and But the other thing is, before we go, I do find that I'm not that old, but as older, I do really begin to appreciate these films a lot more than when I first saw them. As I saw a film when I was 21 or something. It was
a really precious. It was a really exciting time, and. It's not. There's exciting films being made now, independent films, but it's much harder.
Yeah.
I think. There was more. He was supported by public funding to do these things.
Yes, and Channel 4 were brilliant.
It is there, but it's not really there.
Yeah, and it would be
not there for that kind of.
And I think what I loved about Channel 4 is back then, I think Channel 4 was fantastic, and it was so interesting, and there were so many interesting things on it. And they took risks, you see.
Yeah. That was their remit. I mean, supposedly it is still their remit, but you wouldn't really tell.
I don't really notice any difference between them and the other.
Completely. You don't really see anything, I don't, Channel 4 that.
But they made some, and it was fantastic. And I just don't think a film like that, I hate to say it, would be made now.
I agree.
Would it?
I don't think it would be funded. It might be made by some. Well, I think I think maybe. I wonder whether I went to, for the first time in a long, long time, I live in Brighton now, I went up to London and I went to an art exhibition, which I used to do a lot, but, my life is not such that I can go to see art exhibitions as much anymore. And it was mostly sort of, it was at the Hayward Gallery. Actually, it was very good. I'll put that in the link for people who want to see something interesting. It was sort of textiles based thing mostly, but there was a couple of sort of small video pieces in it. And just, when I watched that Greenaway thing this morning as well, I wonder if that kind of that was it really was like an art piece, this Vertical Measures remade, I would say. And I wonder if stuff like that is being made, but you got to see it in an art gallery. It's kind of, if it's funded, it's funded by the Arts Council, maybe. But it's not funded by, it's not going to be funded by Film Investor, like your Greencrest, Goldcrest.
Well,
I don't think it's funded by the BFI. So who's funding a Greenaway of now? I don't think anyone is, sadly.
Well, we live in a much more fragmented world now, where we have social media and all sorts of things, and of course in those days,
there's incredibly interesting stuff going on YouTube and stuff. But I don't think it's not.
Yeah,
it's not.
But you see, the other thing is to understand is in those days, there were only 3 television channels.
There were much
more on Channel 4. So they had huge audience shares of the channel.
Yeah.
So then for advertisers, it was worth their while spending huge amounts of money on advertising.
They could take the risk on more experimental stuff, because they knew they had more of, a captive audience, really. If you only got 4 channels to watch, you've got a good chance that a big chunk of your available audience who might watch TV is going to watch your channel when there's only 4 of them to choose from. But we know that world is long since gone. So yeah.
Brilliant. Well, you want to do another one?
It's been really fun.
And do you want to just tell everybody about your I watched your
Yes.
You
did.
Great, really interesting.
Don't.
So you want to just give yourself a shout?
Yeah. So we're not talking about Channel 4. So my background is I started working in TV, factual TV in 1999, and I did loads of things all through the noughties, which we're now looking back. And I made do you remember the Strand Cutting Edge? That was their sort of flagship documentary strand. Well, I made Cutting Edge. I made 2 cutting edges. I made one called Sleeping with the Au Pair, which is exactly what it sounds like. And then I made another one, which was actually a bit more serious subject. It was about sort of violence committed by, this is early 2000s, the real era of Ibiza Uncovered and binge drinking and stuff. It was about young soldiers in Cyprus, on the British bases in Cyprus, basically doing sexual violence and alcohol fueled violence, and sort of getting away with it because they were able to get back to the base. And there was a really terrible murder case of a young Danish woman who was killed by some British squaddies. And it was actually a very interesting film. It was it was commissioned as part of, do you remember, oh God, what was it called? The barracks. Oh, goodness me. There's a military barracks about 20 years ago, and there was a spate of suicides.
Yes, I do. Yeah. I do. It was awful. Yeah.
It was commissioned, Deep Cut, something like that. You remember? Yeah. It was commissioned as a 3-part series. Deep Cut. That's it. Anyway, it was commissioned as a 3-part, one of 3 films looking at, I guess, the underside of our. It was in the wake of Iraq, and we're backing our boys, but who are our boys really, and what do we actually know about the British forces? But then, unfortunately, I think 2 of the other films got mired in kind of legals, and so the one I made just got put out on its own, and they titled it Squaddies on the Rampage. So it was actually quite an interesting, serious topic, and was tackled in a relatively, serious way, but was given this horrific tabloid title. And, and I made various, I also made the thing that sort of tipped me over the edge to go off and make films independently was do you remember ASBO's? Antisocial behaviour orders. I made a series for Sky called ASBO Fever, which was even this is in, I don't know, 2005 or 6. even at the time, I remember feeling like deeply uncomfortable. It was basically sort of like, it was all done. It was filmed in a sort of Benny Hill style, but it was basically people really with serious mental health problems who were being given ASBOs for behaviour that was very concerning. But the reason that they were doing these disconcerting behaviours was because they had mental health, unsupported mental health problems in most cases, I think. But we did it. It was sort of just like sort of comedy, there was like sexy ASBOs, pet ASBOs, and it was so awful. And and the worst thing was I was saying to the people I was working with how uncomfortable I felt about the tone that we were taking with some of these things. And nobody else, they didn't know what I was talking about. And nobody was taking it seriously. And I really remember that ASBO fever being a moment where I was like, I don't know if I want to like be working in TV anymore, because I'd come out of university all full of ideas about making serious documentaries. And so I sort of bounced off and started this. And I did go back to TV because, it's as we were talking about funding, the people are not really falling over themselves to fund independent stuff. But I went off and started this kind of parallel journey to start making films, documentaries about something I was interested in alongside TV. And over a very long period of time, I got kind of by pure chance, really, because it was in the news, I plucked the topic of nuclear power as a topic that I thought would be interesting. That was in like the mid-late 2000s. And I made some short films about it, just part-time. And then I ended up making the big feature that I made, which is called The Atom: A Love Affair, which you can watch on Netflix and also on Disney Plus, quite bizarrely.
God, I saw it on Netflix.
Which that's great.
I mean, it's in the 1950s, and they get obsessed with atoms. And
so the conceit is that the peaceful atom is like the sort of like roguish, romantic hero. You talk about Confessions of the Window Cleaner, he's like there's the love rap, that's sort of like that. It was a sort of, obviously, talking about tone and stuff and Greenaway. I wanted it to be, it's a serious film, and it's a serious topics, the subject about, energy policy and all of that. And I interviewed politicians and engineers and all the people who are involved. I did take it seriously, but I also didn't want it to be like Eat Your Greens kind of, I wanted it to be a fun film. And so we sort of laid on this metaphor of the sort of love rat on top with the sort of, the turbulent sort of love affair. And it was a love affair specifically rather than love story. Sometimes people get the name wrong and they call it The Atom: A Love Story. But for me, it's quite key that it's a sort of torrid love affair rather than a love story.
Yeah.
But when we were pitching for money, to finish the film, we went to a few film markets, and I got some quite interesting. There's actually a sort of like there's a 1-hour TV version of the film that all the love affair stuff is taken out, which has been sold to TV around the world. And we got a lot of feedback when I was in post-production that the love affair stuff, and they were like, this was a lot of European buyers. They were like, it's that fantastic British sense of humour, but they were basically saying it wouldn't translate the kind of, I guess, like tongue in cheek. And some of the reviewers didn't like. For me, I pushed this metaphor of the love affair to the nth degree in a sort of ridiculous way, which I found enjoyable. But some people found the sort of pushing of the metaphor that it was not to their taste. But but it is, I should say, it is ultimately, it's a serious film what I tried to do. I'm very inspired by Norma Percy, who made Death of Yugoslavia and Putin in the West and all those films. I mean, not to put myself in the bracket with her, but that thing of like she wants to always interview the people who were there, who were in the room. And so to the extent that I was able to, going back, there weren't people alive anymore from the 50s, but as soon as I could get the real people, like I interviewed the head of EDF in the 70s when France went all nuclear. He was in his 90s, but he was around and he was...
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember.
So it's trying to be... So it's not as much as I could. It's not like talking heads. It's the people who were there on all sides, the activists and the scientists and the politicians. So, yes, check out my film. Thank you for the chance to...
So, brilliant. So we ought to do one of these again.
We should. And I'd love to hear from everyone who's here live or anybody who watches this later. Like, what if you enjoyed it? Let us know.
Yeah, going back to drop contact quickly before we go. If anybody has any questions, please do let us know. You
can pop something in the chat,
specifically on the plot of the Draughtsman's contract. Otherwise, I think we're coming up now. Yes, we're coming up in an hour.
Well, that seems like a good moment to
good. Okay, thank you very much,
everyone.
And everybody go.
End.
Great.
This is where it gets very professional. I think I literally just hit end. So thank you. Enjoy your lunch.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. Thank you.
Guys.
Bye.